That's how Google spelled it, so that's what I'm going with.
It's onomatopoeia. It's got a T.
I love how the word that's supposed to mean like, is like.
Onomatopoeia.
I love how it's so difficult. Like, let's see if I can figure it out.
Mm-mm. Oh. Mm. Huh? Okay, I'm only gonna give you 5 minutes to answer this question. You literally cannot be wrong. Don't write an essay. Just jot some of your ideas down so that you don't draw a blank when we're discussing.
Sorry. No.
Tori and I had a good conversation.
I actually sang. It was great.
She did.
All right, so what did you guys discuss?
We talked about how like just through the use of like for like deaf poetry and like English poetry and stuff like that, like even just like the use of sign language, the deaf culture through the deaf poetry is encouraging the deaf culture because they're using their culture to encourage their culture, and it's like
What do you mean by they're using their culture to encourage poetry?
well, it's like it's deaf poetry and it's based off of their culture, like things that they understand and that happen to them.
Yeah.
And so by
Yeah,
using
definitely.
their sign language and or whatever they use for their poetry, they're encouraging other people. So like if like a hearing person goes to it, they're like presenting their culture to that person, whether or not they like are trying to.
Yeah,
So it's
definitely.
Part of what I said was that emotions, I was thinking like in the sense of poetry, like slam poetry,
Yeah.
because that's when you see a lot of expression with.
Mm-hmm.
And when you like do hearing culture in the slam poetry, it's like, oh, we're taking something that is super important. Like I see a lot about like women's rights, or I see a lot about like living with depression, living with anxiety. And it's kind of like, okay, we had this written down, we had this planned out.
Mhm.
But I think, especially with deaf people with deaf culture, it's very like on the spot, like, oh, it's happening right now. And so their emotions are much more passionate because it's in that moment. They don't have time to like
Yeah.
write it
Well,
out.
and if you think about it, so every issue that hearing people go through, so anxiety,
Yeah.
depression, women's rights, the LGBTQ community, everything that hearing people go through, and any discrimination or any struggle we go through, the deaf people do it
Yeah.
while being deaf.
Yeah.
So their experience is much more emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll see it, and I'll show you guys some slam poetry, and you're gonna be like, oh, dang.
And I say another like a big difference between the two is the presentation of it.
Yes.
Because with deaf like sign language in general, you have to be much more expressive, and so
Mhm.
the difference between the two is, I think, quite stark.
Yeah. Yeah. What'd you guys come up with?
Yeah.
So, but what I mean, but you know what poetry is. How can it relate to culture? You can come up with something. It's the same for deaf. A lot of poetry. Sorry. Yeah. So poetry and storytelling, just as an English hearing culture, has been a way to pass on traditions and pass on history, and it's a close knit thing where you can like sitting around the campfire. What'd you say?
Beowulf.
Yeah.
Epic poetry kind of.
Yeah, epic poetry. Yes, same thing in deaf culture. It's been passed down through generations. Okay. Here's because it's already 7:20. How does this happen? Okay.
You get excited.
Here is your food for thought for tonight. So, if you will, homework, but just really just food for thought. You guys know what caused the standardization of sign language, correct? What brought on standardization?
Oh, I heard.
What brought on the standardization of American Sign Language?
School.
Schools. Yes. Before schools, how were deaf people learning sign language?
Community or
Yeah.
regional,
Community.
like,
Yep.
passed down.
Yep. On top of schools, once all these deaf people we're like, oh my gosh, there's so many deaf people, and we can be a community. What's another deaf cultural aspect? It's not a huge thing anymore.
Did they like? Were there a lot of like very large deaf gatherings with like a bunch of deaf people got together?
Yeah, deaf clubs.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Okay, so your food for thought tonight is, what was the impact of deaf clubs within deaf culture? And what has been the impact of hearing people infiltrating those deaf clubs and the developing the quickly developing technology? How have those things affected deaf clubs and the deaf culture as a whole? Okay. Let me post that on Classroom while I'm thinking about it. Okay, so how did deaf clubs impact community? How did that feel? How did the what? All right, I would like you to answer this on here tonight so that when you come tomorrow, you can discuss it. Okay. What was I gonna say? Oh, Kenny and Lauren, you guys missed this part. This is a mini unit, so we're gonna actually have a test on this Friday on poetry or art as a whole. I'm thinking it might end up just being over poetry if this is all we got done today, which is fine because I think you guys had great discussion. But if I'm adding in poetry or art along with it, then it might be overwhelming for a 1 week unit. So we'll see. We'll see how far we get. So it might. What'd you say? Where are they gonna be? Oh, okay.
Bad word. Oh shoot, he wants to be there.